Hey folks, Steve here with another End of Empire video. In this video, we will be looking at the French and Indian War scenario, French and Indian War campaign, a base game campaign that comes with the box. Due to the potential length, we may need to separate coverage of this scenario into multiple videos. We'll kind of see how that plays out. If you're watching this on YouTube and there's a part one or something that alludes to us not completing everything in this video, you'll obviously know that before you know, as you're watching this video, as I'm saying this, you'll already know. I don't know right now where we're going to end up with that. The French and Indian War scenario is a much larger one than what we've seen before. While King William's War and Queen Anne's War are longer in terms of turns, this scenario will run out to I'm going to do the full campaign, which is going to take us out to at least turn 46. There's also a little bit of special stuff that I may introduce that will push us longer. I'll cover that in a couple minutes. But what differentiates this scenario from the others is that there are a lot more units that will be on the board at any given time, many more leaders, many more activations, and a whole lot more strategic concerns than any other campaign that we've played up to this point, including King George's War. I think King George's War covered enough that we could start to see how things could become much more complicated. And in this one, indeed, we will see a lot more. The game has basically a main French and Indian War scenario that deals largely just with what's going on up here. There's also a full campaign, which is what I'm going to try to play, which requires that the British, quote unquote, burn and destroy a Cherokee Native American village, which is sort of west of Virginia. On the South map, we'll show that as well here soon. And the French also get some additional units in Louisiana, and I'm still not 100% sure what I'm supposed to be doing with those guys. Maybe bring them up the Mississippi River for support elsewhere, I guess. Still not totally confident and sure how that's going to work. But there's a lot to this one. What's interesting is I think a lot of people buy this game, End of Empire, and while the main show is supposed to be the American Revolution, I think in many ways, a lot of people end up playing the French and Indian War scenario because it's not quite as big, but it's still a campaign that people are familiar with. It's well known. There are other games that cover this campaign. And I will say that I do have familiarity with this topic. I have books on the French and Indian War. I have played Wilderness War, which is a great game on this subject, card-driven game from GMT. And so I'm kind of versed enough in the topic that, for me, I'm going to have some good understanding of what should be happening, kind of what are the main concerns here. And I'll say from this campaign from King George's War, we're running into another situation where the French are going to largely be on the defensive, and maybe it'll just come down to how well can they execute a active defense against the British, and the victory conditions kind of line up with that as well. The reason why I'm doing the full campaign as opposed to the main is just I want to make sure I hit the full breadth of the topic, and in particular, what the full campaign does to the victory conditions is makes it so that the British cannot sort of wantonly waste their advantage in terms of manpower and combat factors that they can bring to the map. So I want to kind of talk about those victory conditions. So again, this is the full campaign. The British player wins if at the start of any game turn or at the end of turn 32. So that would be, you guys can't quite see it on the turn track. I'll show that shortly. Basically, the end of summer 1760. If they are occupying every French supply and entry hex in Canada with a supplied British unit, and those are going to be Montreal, hex 3411, Three Rivers 3710, Quebec 4111, And then also technically Grand Prix, which is in Nova Scotia. And I'll talk about the importance of Nova Scotia in a second. So those four important hexes um, are needed in that case. Uh, and then the British must burn the Cherokee village at some point prior to turn 46. And they have to make all required West Indies withdrawals, and the British must retain control of the French victory hexes listed above throughout turns 33 to 46. And 46 takes us out to basically the beginning of 1763. The French player wins if the British fails to achieve this by the end of the game. So effectively, the British must defeat the French. They must occupy the region up here, as well as retain control of Grand Pré, which technically the British have control of at the start of this, if you do your setup correctly. And then they have to go on a jaunt out into the wilderness to defeat the Cherokees, and then they have withdrawals to make, which, in terms of what that looks like here, on turns 36, 39, and 40, there are a number of withdrawals that need to occur. On turn 36, the fleets are withdrawn, and then 6 steps of British or provincial regulars have to be withdrawn. And they give the historical designations of which units were withdrawn then. Then in turn 39, we have to withdraw 23 steps of British or provincial regulars. And then on turn 40, we have to withdraw 7 steps and 1 provincial regiment. So when you look at that and you try to understand, well, what does that functionally mean? Well, we're going to have like 36, 37 steps of the British that we can't afford to lose. And what I like about this as part of the full campaign is it means that, yes, from the beginning of the scenario, the British are going to have many advantages at their disposal. They're going to have a lot of strong units. But if they waste them, they can lose the war because effectively they might have won on, area control, but the British army has been heavily depleted, which, I don't know, you fast forward a few years, that might make the American Revolution even easier because the British forces are so depleted. They're trying to replace their regular line infantry over those intervening years or something. I don't know. I mean, that there's a big enough span of time there, like 10 some years, that they'd probably be able to replenish their army by then. But who knows? I don't know. I like it. It means the British has to think a little more intelligently about their campaigns than just marching forward and throwing caution to the wind. And I think that's an important aspect if you're going to balance the French and Indian War as a conflict in a war game. So, for instance, like Wilderness War, because it's a card-driven game and it's kind of a different system, the French player can get victory points by doing raids with Native Americans. And that's sort of how they can make up for either lost territory over time. If they keep doing those raids, it gives the French player something to do and to make it more costly of a victory for the British, no matter what the game state is at the end of that game. So that works for Wilderness War. I'm sure other French and Indian War games do similar types of things. In AG Odds Wars for America PC game, there is basically a mechanic there a little bit where even if the British win on victory points, they can fail to achieve a victory if they've lost too many men, which to me seems like a similar thing here. So there's definitely a model for it, and I think if you're only playing the main campaign, you would lose some of that, because the main campaign victory conditions are basically just the British player wins if they control every French supply and entry hex, and that's it. And I feel like there just has to be a bit more to it than that to fully encompass the push and pull and make it more interesting for the French player. So that's why I'm doing what I'm doing. Now, I will say, technically, New Orleans, down on the south map, is considered a supply hex, but it is still not used for victory. But you can see we start with several units and then a stronger unit. But many of the, like this strongest unit can't leave the hex by itself. You need to bring a French leader down. And then the rest of these guys could, but I'm not sure where you're going to take them. I think what you could do is you could take them sailing up the Mississippi, and you could go all along here, up through here, and get to what is this, Detroit? Yeah, Fort Detroit, and then be kind of backing up these guys. And it's not impossible to conceive of them doing that. Like, you could certainly try. I think it's a tough thing. I have a red bingo chip. I've got red, blue, and green bingo chips, guys, and they just come in handy for anything. I've marked this here, that this is the village that the French will need to take. Now, the thing is, they're not allowed to actually enter that hex until turn 29, actually. So when we talk about, like, hey, the British have to go take out that village, they can't just do it in the first couple of turns and be done with it. They have to wait until turn 29, and then they have to do it by, what was it? By turn 46. So you have a span of, like, that's a couple years. I mean, I don't think it would take that long if you got a decent leader to go do it. But there's a specific time box for them to come and take that out. And they can use, like, what I'm trying to think, what's the fastest route to get there? They'd probably come into, like, Wilmington, the port of Wilmington in North Carolina, and then travel by river, then by road, and then come up here. So if you were starting in Wilmington, be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 12. Let's see, what's road movement here? Okay, that doesn't. Okay, so 12, 17. Like, you could get next to the village in one move, in one campaign season. You probably stop in Salisbury, and then you go 1, 2, 7 movement points, and then 10 more to move in and attack the village. And assuming you're going to have combat there, and that will be, so basically you need two turns to do it if you start in Wilmington and you have a force that's going to be able, capable of taking it. So I don't see it as a big issue to achieve that. I do want to show the turn track. So there's a specific turn track for the French and Indian War. Oh, whoops! I think I lost track of. Oh no, that's Fort Detroit. I'm sorry. Game turn marker. We start on the summer of 1755, and then there are all these reinforcements. There are also withdrawals throughout the campaign. But those are relatively easy to manage. The game does come with, at the back of the scenario book, a turn track marker or turn track chart that tells you who comes in and who withdraws, in addition to what's printed on the counter, so you can kind of always make sure you're doing things properly. Though there are some minor errata to those charts you should take a look at. But you can see there's various stacks of units that will come in, but the vast majority of those are British. So this is what I mean when I say, like, the British are going to get a lot of stuff. And it will not be fair if they get to just wield these hammers without any sort of, constraint on it. Because historically, the British didn't really do that. Right? They were still careful to marshal their forces. They wielded their armies with some intelligence, not just chucking them at the French and hoping for the best. So I want to make sure that behavior's included here. And then, as we get towards the later part of it, I have a red bingo chit to note when the Cherokee, there's also the Cherokee unit itself that comes in on this turn. But that's when the Cherokee Rebellion happens, and we can enter that hex as the British. And then these turns, 36, 39, and 40, are the withdrawal turns that the British are going to have to pay attention to before the end of the game. So that's going to be the basic run through. One thing that I may do, I'm either going to do it as a part of this, or I'm going to do it as a separate video and a separate scenario, is The Paper Wars 86 scenarios include something called Pontiac's Rebellion, and they either have it as an extension of the French and Indian War or they have it as a separate scenario. And you can see what it does is it extends this scenario out to turn 51. No expansion counters are used. We just use what we have. And then basically French units are done because the French and Indian War is over, but what transitions are a greater Native American rebellion. And so the French player will automatically recruit a whole bunch of those units. And then they're going to be, they're going to have to deal with these guys. And I'm kind of wondering, like, is this going to really throw off the whole war to tack this on at the end? If it feels like it's just a little too much to maybe possibly invalidate everything else that went on, I might simply do it as a separate scenario, Pontiac's Rebellion, and that would probably be okay too. But I'm going to leave the option open just because I think it's an interesting ad with the expansion content that came in that magazine. To hit some other things here. So the start of the map, start of the scenario, at least in the northern half, we have out here at Fort Duquesne in present-day Pittsburgh, and I'm originally from one of these wilderness hexes right around here. There are a whole mean stack of Native American units that would have historically been the ones that totally ripped the Braddock Expedition a new one. And the Braddock Expedition is right here. So Braddock is here. He's not a great leader, but he activates reasonably well. He's got several regular units. He's got some Virginia guys, and everyone likes to point this stuff out. A young man named Washington is in there. Yeah, that's right. It's practically a history meme at this point that George Washington was there. And then we've got some more militia that I put out here, or the militia that is with the stack, and then there's some other Maryland militia in some places here. So there's a whole stack in terms of their ability to defend of an ambush. They've got some capability if they take the Virginia militia with them. So there is actually a possibility of Braddock succeeding in the expedition in this game system. It's just going to come down to, can the French allied units activate and sort of create a perimeter around Fort Duquesne, and then it'll be a lot harder for Braddock's stack to come into a hex and be able to do anything. If he manages to succeed, then the path is open, and this is going to be the three-prong approach for the British in this war. If they can come out here and disrupt this, they are going to lock down this front pretty well. And how that affects the French and British Native American ally stuff is here. There's going to be, if you take control of Duquesne, then the Delaware and the Mingo may potentially join with the British if you can get the loyalty high enough. And so that will be significant. And then what it also does is it opens up a pathway to get British units able to trace supply along the roads and then the rivers up to Lake Erie, up to Presque Isle, and then they can start marching on Niagara. And then if you take Niagara, that has other impacts here as well. So if I get that going, let's see where it is. Niagara is worth a Iroquois loyalty point. So that's going to shift where we're rolling on this chart to the right, which will prove valuable. And then, like any outflank, even at the strategic layer, then you're talking about greater ability to get guys in through here, as well as from Albany and New York in general, to tie up, take control of Fort Oswego, which also impacts loyalty. And this is where then the sort of native alliance advantage that the French has starts to fall apart, and we would see, the fall of Niagara, potentially the fall of Fort Frontenac, um, up here at the edge of Lake Ontario. Uh, and that would generally be very good for the British. So they definitely, like, if they can get the Braddock expedition to succeed, it will be very valuable. If it fails, because there's not a system in this game where French raids will give the French any victory points, the reality will be, if they eliminate Braddock, then these guys are going to be more likely to head east, and just be a nuisance through here, which would be a problem for the British, would slow them down to being able to take control of Fort Oswego, or even put Fort Stanwix under threat. So there'll definitely be a use. Like, whatever happens here will have a long-term game effect either way. In the Central Theater, the Central Advance, which is predicated on Lake Champlain, Governor Shirley has a stack of some guys. Now, historically, I think he was looking at going to Fort Oswego, and then having some other units be looking at heading up the way to deal with Crown Point, which is not heavily defended at this point, but there's still something there to block. We still have a lot of militia and provincials here that need to be gathered up. But on turn 7, there's going to be a big stack of reinforcements on the British side, which I think is going to kind of decide a lot of what happens. So that is where we get Abercrombie and a whole big stack of units, and that's probably going to affect things greatly in the game. The thing will be, if the British can succeed here, this was a very critical part of the war between Fort Carillon, or Carillon, I can never say that right, Carillon and Crown Point. The fighting through this valley was really important, but you could see, like, if the British can get up to Montreal, that shuts things down. They start pushing on Quebec. That would be significant. You're not going to see as much action directly out here. This is kind of some dead space, and just due to supply concerns, you're not typically going to be able to do a whole lot other than maybe execute some campaign from here and here and try to bridge the gap and make some big play for Quebec, but I don't see that as being super likely. In Nova Scotia, things are kind of interesting because, well, Nova Scotia and Louisbourg, because the British player starts with the Nova Scotia militia and then 3 regular units that they can set up anywhere over here. And they can set up anywhere. There's a couple of hexes missing from the list due to errata that I wrote into my book, but please check errata. And what you can do is, like, because all these hexes are French friendly by default, to control them, you have to set up units there. So I could choose to set up everybody in Halifax, but I want to make sure that the French do not have any friendly ports in this region. So I need to cover this. I need to cover this, because on turn 1, the French get Dieskau and a whole bunch of regulars. I don't want them to plop anything in Nova Scotia. So I'm gonna garrison these ports, and then I need to put something into Grand Pre, even though it doesn't appear to have a anchor symbol here. I need to put a unit, because sure enough, this is a French supply source and one of the ones that are important for victory. So on turn 1, we sure can put a unit there, and we're going to do that so that Nova Scotia is basically locked down. There is a stack of provincial units here that are set up in Fort Lawrence under fortification, in Fort Cumberland, or the French word for this fort area. There's basically 1 unit there. Now, what the French could do is they could put these reinforcements in this hex and then do some ferrying and do some business over here. I'm not sure if that is going to be the best choice or not. I guess we got to decide what we're going to do with these guys. But we could put them right here, because this is a port that is on the Gulf of St. Lawrence, totally, open for the French to land there. It's just reinforcements. We don't have the French fleet yet, so we have to pick a friendly port, and this is technically a friendly port. but I'm just a little cautious of doing that because it's going to end up being really tricky. What happens from there? Are you going to fight really hard for Nova Scotia when there's much, bigger things under threat over in the Lake Champlain area? There's also Louisbourg, which will obviously be a super important area. There's a number of weak troop units here, 5 steps that are set up. That's enough to hold for a while, but as soon as the British can start taking shots at Louisbourg with anything resembling a decent force, they're going to. I don't think it makes sense to put some of our turn 1 reinforcements in here. I did debate on taking one of the weaker ones and just kind of getting that guy in there, but I'm afraid of denuding this force because we really need something to contest this front. Because as is, Vaudreuil and like a couple units are not going to be enough in terms of combat factors to stand a chance against the British. So we do need to get Dieskau into Montreal from Quebec and contesting Lake Champlain or this area over here. I mean, we have to pick something and make it work. I think historically, I might have a couple details wrong. I think Dieskau did come over to here to represent defense for Lake Champlain, and then Vaudreuil took some of these mixed combat unit type of guys out into the wilderness to contest Fort Oswego, but I might have some of the details wrong there. So there you go. There's the setup, guys. This scenario is going to leverage the Native American Indian recruitment chart as a much more important thing because all these control requirements are going to matter very importantly. All of the loyalty tracks. So right now, the British loyalty, they have 2 for Albany, and let's see. The British do not have Fort Oswego. They don't have Niagara, and they don't have Frontenac. So they have a loyalty of 2, which means that there's a pretty good chance for the French to get the Kanawha. There's a decent chance that the French can get the Seneca repeatedly, the Cayuga repeatedly, the Mingo and the Delaware, Nida and Onondaga. And then, at some point we can get the Mohawk in as the British, but we're going to need to get them higher loyalty. So we're going to need to take something important, and then maybe we can get the Mohawk in. And then, you still have all of these where the French are going to reasonably be able to get these guys back, but only on a die roll of 1. So it's going to kind of take a while. Like, no matter what happens, over here, however it shakes out, a lot of these units are probably going to go away, and it'll take some time for the French to get them back. So a lot to consider here, guys. Again, it's like a really long intro to the scenario, 30 minutes almost, to just cover everything. But I think it's important to call out what has drastically changed in terms of the concerns from all the other scenarios to this one. This one is much more robust, obviously. Now, there's one extra thing I need to call out. I don't think this affected King George's War very much, but I have had some trouble interpreting the recruit replacements for the French. So here's the rule, and it is very similar between the original rules and the Minuteman, where it says that 1 step may be recruited each spring, that the following hexes are controlled, and it lists, those victory hexes, and then it tells you, which type of units can be recruited where. If on first blush, what this read like to me was that 1 step may be recruited, period, each spring, and you have to control all 4 to get that 1 step. However, when you read the rest of it says down here, simply return to play a previously eliminated 1-step unit in each eligible hex. So if you only read the first, half of that paragraph, you might think you're only going to get 1 step back each year. Well, it looks like you can actually get 4 steps if you control all 4 of those. At campaign start here, it's going to be 3, 1 for each of those, because we don't control Grand Prix. But that's significant, right? Getting 3 steps replaced versus 1 step is still significant. And what I'm going to want to do is probably double check on Board Game Geek and just kind of pose the question, or check Consum World to see if somebody else has ever asked this. But mostly because in my mind, I'm like, okay, well, that certainly makes what would be a dire situation for the a dire situation for the French a little bit better. And if it, in each eligible hex, reads to me as meaning you get 1 for each, even though the preceding sentence almost implies you only get 1 per year. So I'll try to get clarity on that, but I think for the first year of campaign, it won't really matter too much. So what I'm going to do is going to be very similar to some of the other earlier videos in the series, where I'm going to cover 1 year of campaigning, and we'll come back in the spring of 1756 and kind of see what the lay of the land is. So this is going to be a turn of basically limited reinforcements, except for the French stack that comes in with Dieskau. And before a big old swamping of other units, no fleets are available, so really no amphibious operations are going to be doable this campaign season. It's all going to be some of those initial activations or those initial actions to get units out and about. So we'll see the aftermath of that here very shortly. Just very quickly, guys, I had made a placement mistake for some reason. I think I had picked up units and moved them around. There's a Maryland militia that is I set up here, but the rest of Braddock is actually in 1015. And so I think I showed a shot earlier. These guys were over here for some reason. I think I picked them up and put them in the wrong place. They're meant to be here. So just clarifying that in case you noticed that error, I did correct it before playing. Okay, hey guys, here we are at the spring turn of 1756, and I'll say that both sides have had some success, some failures on the first sets of activities, the first campaign season, but generally I'd say the French have gotten an early edge, if only because they managed to make some lucky activation rolls towards the winter when the enlisted men of the British were not to be found, to quickly seize control of Albany, which is kind of probably the most significant thing on the board right now. But let's kind of review where things are at. Starting with the western area, basically Braddock never left. He could not be convinced to leave. Maybe he had a vision of the future, that if he had left Fort Cumberland, he would find himself in an early grave. So he never moved. He's been stuck there, failing his die rolls. We have had a couple of these French allied Indian units kind of space out a little bit, so that basically what they want to make sure they can do is try to ambush Braddock, and so that ambush could do some damage to Braddock's stack, then only 1 unit disperses rather than the whole mega stack, and just make it so that he's going to have a hard time activating to actually get up to Fort Duquesne. Now he's got a couple other paths he could try to take, but we're just trying to throw out some interception zones where these guys could react into his stack, or at least where he's going, and just kind of trip him up a little bit. So far, they've not needed to do anything there. He's just not able to make progress. In the center, or I'll say the Oswego and Champlain area, a couple of interesting things. So we did have Shirley start his stack here, and he did go north, and he looped around and grabbed Oswego. And that ended up being in handy for several Native American die rolls on later turns that managed to get the Mohawk into action not once but twice, heavily slowing down the French stack and creating threatened supply problems that forced the French to have to go back and clear their terrain. So what would happen is the Mohawks show up, they got lucky and activated, came over, sat on the supply line forced the French that were coming down the river to turn back, clear the hex. The Mohawk could not ambush well, but got cleared out by linear combat. And then the French would have to come, activate and come back down again. And this happened twice over the course of the campaign season, which was crazy. But the Mohawk are off the board now. What had happened then was, Shirley was here. Then Vaudreuil took his couple guys and he went down to meet Shirley and try to ambush his guys and clear out. And what ended up happening was that Shirley reacted into this space to protect Oswego, left one guy behind, and actually managed to avoid being ambushed, and then in the linear combat managed to achieve a level of victory that cleared Vaudreuil's units and ultimately left him being captured. So technically, Vaudreuil is captured in my holding box for captured guys. And, fortunately in this scenario, there are enough leaders that will come onto the board that someone will get captured and the French could maybe get him back in a prisoner exchange. But it's kind of a hard hit to the French to lose a leader that early. I do find, like, if you read the rules, it's like if your entire stack gets wiped out, the leader gets captured. And I don't know what happens when you have combats where both sides are destroyed. Like, do both leaders get captured? The rules don't seem to be very clear on that. I have found that in earlier scenarios, it is very easy to have the entire game slow to a halt because your one leader or one side's good leader gets captured and like you just can't activate anything. I feel like that bad luck is mitigated in these bigger scenarios where there's guaranteed to be more leaders. But even at the early start, the French kind of got hurt on that one. Now, victory turned to ash in Shirley's mouth because of what happened down here. I'll also call out that the Seneca have entered on the French side, and so have the Caughnawaga, but they haven't been able to activate to do much yet. Because they kind of entered right as winter was starting, and you can't activate anything without a leader in winter, and even then it's very rare. But Dieskau, being the awesome guy that he has, he's probably the best leader we've seen in some time. He is not just activating on a 5 or less, but he actually provides a combat bonus. So he is awesome. We love him. He came down and basically removed this French fort at Saratoga. Or Fort Edward, whatever. And then the Mohawk came in. They went back, cleared the Mohawk, came back down, had to do it again. And in a winter combat, they entered into Albany after the enlisted men had vanished, took on the militia, defeated them with a max die roll, the best die roll that you could get, and are now currently sitting happy and pretty in Albany. Now, they left one guy behind because this is a wilderness hex, and these guys have the attacking ambush factor, so he can sit quite good right there. And sitting on Albany itself does a couple of things. One is, in terms of supply, these guys up here could not trace supply any longer. They couldn't trace supply to a supply hex. They couldn't trace overseas supply. And this guy was safe because he's on an outpost, but this guy was not. And so there has been some attrition that is occurring there that will continue to be a problem for those guys, or at least this guy. He needs to figure out how to get down to Fort Stanwix or something. Obviously, the French Allied Indians would like to sweep through here and just disrupt as much of that as they can, but at least for now, the British will hold on to Oswego. However, the loss of Albany has dramatically shifted things. So the Iroquois loyalty table, so there was a point where, the British were up to 3 loyalty, 2 for Albany, 1 for Oswego. They were going to hope to get a lot more. Well, with the loss of Albany, now the Iroquois are down to 1, which makes it easier for the Caughnawaga to come in, which they did. The Seneca, who did come in, and several others that I didn't roll well enough to bring them in yet, but there's 3 more tribes that could enter on the French side here soon, depending on how the die rolls go. So generally, if you were to trade Oswego for Albany, you'd rather not make that trade. You'd want to hold on to Albany, but the French have managed to come in and do that. Um, so they do have control of this river line for supply in the winter. So they passed for that. They're really good for the moment. Um, though it is a perilous thing because again, there's this space here where the British could try to sweep in and cut off supply. But at least for the next campaign season, the French have some options here. They would have liked to have stuck a unit in Schenectady. I can't say like I should know how to pronounce that, but I'm not very good at it. When the spring came back, this unit came back. There would have been a unit that came here and a unit that came here, but we're sitting on top of the hex. So their entry is delayed, at least until next turn. They don't have boxed entry or underline entry numbers. So we managed to keep some British reinforcements from re-entering by just sitting on top of these hexes. So we're in effect delaying, the British advantage. Now, I knew that that was going to end up happening. So when Shirley didn't move up here in the winter, I did a redeploy to bring him down to Boston, where we can at least get some more help down here. Now we got a reinforcement, a decently strong regiment, and we've still got some provincials down here, as well as these scattered ones that are kind of out and about in a couple different places that we could use. The other important thing is the British have got their fleet this turn. So they rolled well enough. The French did not. So the British have their fleet, which means they could opt to try to do something at Louisbourg. I do generally worry that Dieskau being in Albany is kind of a critical pain point, and we need to do something about that. And I'll also say that the eliminated Vaudreuil units have come back up here due to recruit replacement. So I interpret the rule that if you control these 3 hexes, you can get up to 3 replacements, 1 in each hex. And so I put the 2 replacements here. So a little bit of a slowdown. It's going to be hard to get these guys back over here, but I think we could eventually do it. So the French are feeling pretty good, which is about on par here. The early game, the French have a lot of more capability than they will as the war drags on and on and on. But generally feeling pretty good. Some things that I would have liked to have done as the British were to take this stack into Fort Cumberland, but unfortunately, these guys were enlisted, and so they vanished. They've come back, but they need to activate on their own to walk over here and to take this hex. Meanwhile, the Micmac have come onto the board, and that could prove to be a challenge now because these guys could swoop in and cause some havoc over here. So there's just a lot, interactivity here that just is waiting for activations. As I've said before, leaders are the real driver of the game. You're going to get lucky to activate something without a leader. So it's like those little spurts of luck, but you can't count on it. You really need to know where your leaders are going to be. I feel like with a good a chance that the British have of getting their fleet on the board, it may be better for Shirley to gather up some enlisted men and try to break Albany free. And he could probably easily do it because he can pick up some of these militia. The only problem will be if he fails to activate after picking something up, which you have to roll for. So there's all these different things that are kind of difficult to figure out what's the best thing to do. And having played French and Indian War in like the AGOD PC game, I did find if I ever captured Albany as the French, that tended to be really useful because it's just the British can't threaten behind you very much. So as long as you own Albany, so for now the French are going to have to hold tooth and nail onto this. With the Native American die roll table chart currently weighed in the French favor, the sooner they get the rest of these Indian units on the board, the better. And the British are going to be fighting tooth and nail to come back from it. So what we'll do is we'll come back in the spring of 1757 and show where things are at. I do want to call out that next turn, on a summer turn, a lot more reinforcements are going to come in. So for the French fleet possibility, I just had them sat there. We get our good guy Montcalm. He is the best leader the French will ever see, will ever get. He is the man, the myth, the legend, the MMM Montcalm. He activates almost all the time. There's some exceptions in winter and different things. And he has a 2 bonus. So the French being in a very good position with Montcalm is going to be a big deal. We also get an additional leader. He'll sort of make up for the loss of Vaudreuil. We also get another leader who, I mean, maybe we get him with some native units or something. And then we get a few more regular units that will just kind of help us somewhere, wherever we want to go. Maybe we send those guys to Louisbourg. I don't know. Now, on the British side, here's the Connecticut unit that we could not enter because he's supposed to go right here. So he gets delayed. Same thing with our Albany provincials. But the British will get Abercrombie. And he's an okay leader, right? He's basically as good as Shirley. And then we're going to get some more enlisted. We're going to get, I think that's MD should be, what, Maryland? I'm an American. I should know this stuff, right? Pennsylvania militia comes on. Then we get some Pennsylvania enlistments. We get some more provincial regulars, some more Pennsylvania enlistments, some Highlanders, I think is what that denotes. And North Carolina enlistments, and I guess some more regular Highlanders there. So it's a big deal. It's sort of one of those weird things because I do these check-ins on the spring turn. There were some basic, little reinforcements, but next turn in summer is really the more important one. And depending on which fleets are available next turn, that could be a major decider. Do the British send their reinforcement stack to Louisbourg and we let Shirley try to contest Dieskau, or do we plop those guys, Abercrombie in New York and come up the river? It's really going to depend on that fleet availability, and that's pretty much the first thing we'll do in the next turn after we're done with this spring turn. I'm not sure what the French can do this spring turn. Probably, well, the British will get to go first, so we'll have to see what they can react to, and then possibly trying to eliminate some of these units. If they can eliminate any enlisted units, they're going to be gone until next year. So there's definitely a carrot to knock this unit out, maybe get something where these guys come down and disrupt those units. And if we can just continue to bloody the British and delay them from making progress, that may simply be enough to win in the long run as the French. But it's so early. We're only 1 year in, and there's many years to go and many more reinforcements to eventually come in. So, all right, we'll see you then in the spring of 1757. Well, actually, you know what? I think now is a good time to pause the game. So we did the intro and we did a year's worth of campaigning. Why don't I shift the next report to another video, and then this one will be a little under, or should be around an hour long video for part 1, and we'll take it from there. All right, well, anyway, thanks for watching, guys. We'll see you in the next video when we get to the spring of 1757. How about that? All right, take care, guys. Keep gaming.